Good morning, good afternoon, good night. I am Ryan Cook. Whatever time you're watching this video, thanks for watching Common Sense Fishing.
I'm still out there. Oh my God.
Perfect, I like that.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God, get the net. Get the net. It's a DD. Get the net, bro. Please get the net. Oh my God, this is a DD.
Hey, what's up guys? Nick the Informative Fisherman here, and you're watching Common Sense Fishing. Check it out.
Bam.
When they're monsters like that, they can, huh?
What you looking at? All right, guys and gals. So again, we're gonna reiterate how I fish this type of bottom, right? Rocky, craggly bottom. Instead of fishing the way you'll like I said, you'll see a lot of guys that say they want to maintain contact, so they pull shallow, they toss out deep, and they bring it up. That's how guys like Jeremy fish, really good fishermen. That's how a lot of other guys I know fish, and they stick them. Only problem is you're gonna also get snagged a lot that way. It's just the physics of it, right? If you put your boat out over deep and you cast into shallow, now again, this is searching right now. Let's say we don't have a pattern yet, and you're trying to cover all this, the ticket is to simply go slow. Because of the dynamics of water, any lift in your rod is going to translate to a lot of movement down there. So, I mean, you want to eke and crawl that thing. And let's say you're eking it and you're crawling it along, but then all of a sudden, you know, at this point you go to pull, but you notice your line's tight, open your bell, because you may have a 10-foot, 8-foot drop off in these highland lakes with just a half an inch. You may be all of a sudden on the precipice of a big boulder or cliff, right? And you don't know that, but one little twitch with your pole and your lure's falling now. So be very attentive to your slack and your line, so you know that your bait is always on the bottom. That is very key in the winter time when the fish are on the bottom and they're not suspended. And simply move your bait slow. So, and remember to work it all the way underneath the boat. Now again, let's just say you've already established a pattern and you know those fish are in 30 feet deep like we talked about earlier. We've seen how I'm going to get parallel. I'm going to fish with the shoreline, right? And then I'm going to fish in that depth constantly so that my bait is in that strike zone the whole entire time, basically, right? And we also talked about how I kind of cut across at a 45 so that I'm also coming down as well as going across, so that I'm not going to just snag into rocks constantly. So there's a little bit of a science into how I do it. But the secret in order to actually catch fish is you don't want to be Air Jordan with your bait swimming out here and you think you're on the bottom. You need to be extremely slow, and if you do that, you will keep your bait on the bottom and you will get more fish. I guarantee it. So I hope these tips and tricks help out. We're going to see you back on the board here. I've got a couple more, and we're going to be back out on the lake to show you these in action in the second video. All right, guys and gals, we're going to talk about my top baits to throw in the winter time and why I throw them. Okay, so my number one bait, I hate to say it, but I'm going to be real, is the drop shot. Okay. Now here are some things we want to discuss about the drop shot. It's a very versatile bait. So I'm going to go over quickly a couple of different ways. So let's say you are in your boat, you look down, and on your fish finder, you just see this big old school of fish down there, right? You can take your drop shot and just drop it straight down and then into them fish and barely move it. You can pop it, you can do all kinds of things with them. Right, when you know that they're doing like this, like getting over main lake points. Remember how we talked about once we've established a pattern and we know what depth they're in, then we sit there and we hover like a helicopter, even if it's a helicopter, even if it takes us 20 or 30 minutes, if we know there's decent fish down there, if we can get them to fire up and turn on, all we need is 1 or 2, even just 1, you know, because you got, say you're fishing a tournament, you got 8 hours, right? Or however many hours you got, you know, those fish can all come in the last half hour, last hour, they can come in the first hour. So it's all about having a positive attitude, about having confidence. So knowing that you could get your butt kicked and not catch barely any fish or any fish, but by golly, you're going to go in there and you're going to catch fish. You just got to have confidence. You got to have a positive attitude, mind over matter, right? That's really important. So again, drop shot. This is, you know, really important that you have confidence. So you know that they're down there. You know you can catch them. Maybe cycle through your worm sizes. You know, your 7-inch. You know, your 6-inch. You know, and your 7-inch, your 6-inch or whatever, 5-inch. You got your little 4-inch. You know, a 3, 2.5, whatever. Get your little different drop shot worms, different colors, and figure out what the bass seem to get them to strike. What does it seem to take to get them to bite? And another thing is your leader length. So say you got your hook here and you got your leader here, right? What's the length between your hook and your leader? And a lot of guys, I'll give you a realistic length. A lot of guys I see, they have their hook up here, let's say, and their leader is down to about right here. That's about the common drop shot leader I see, is I would say between 12 and 18 inches. And I would say that is all bad. If you're fishing a drop shot, there's only usually 2 ways you want to fish it, okay? In my opinion, you want to fish it with between a 4 and maybe an 8-inch leader between the hook and the bottom there, right? Even sometimes smaller, 2 or 3 inch, but you want to figure out how close to the bottom those fish are, because if you're using a drop shot, those fish are usually pretty close to the bottom. And if they're off of the bottom, then yes, I go to like an 18 or even a 24-inch leader, depending on their activity level. And you can pop it and wiggle it and move it around if they're a couple of feet off the bottom, right? So it just depends on the situation and what I'm doing. So that's one way. So that's one way to use a drop shot. Drop straight down, right? Here's another way. A lot of guys don't realize this. Let's just say, again, you got this 35 feet, 30 feet. You know the bass are in that range. Well, I'll position my boat here. And let's say I see a couple fish here. But I can only see what's, let's say, right here. All right, and I see a couple fish. There could be, I have no idea how good or bad it is. Could be no fish there, right? So what I'll do is I'll bomb my lure out, and then I'll slowly drag it back in that manner which I told you. And let's say the shore is right here. Remember, what I will try to do, if this was the case here, I'd probably pull my boat out a little further, cast like this, and try to get a little bit of some slope, so I'm always working my lure downhill. And again, that's going to be contrary to what most guys are going to tell you. They're going to tell you to work it uphill because you're going to have more contact, which is true. But remember, if you're not a pro, you're going to get snagged like every cast. So if you want to practice more at catching fish and less getting snagged, slow down and do it the way that I'm saying, and the physics will work on your side. So, but there are times where I've had to get up shallow and cast out and work it that way. I do like to fish like that. I'm just trying to help you. I can fish both ways, but I'm just telling you what I prefer, just for simplicity and to help me catch fish in numbers and struggle less. Because, I mean, who likes getting snagged? But sometimes, again, when the bite's super tough, try that. Pull up to shallow, cast out deep, and pull the lure in towards you. I guarantee you'll notice you get snagged a lot more, but that might be what it takes to trigger the fish, because them fish can be tucked into those rocks really tight. So I hope these tips and tricks help out. Again, these are for mostly the mother lode lakes. I'm going to try to get into some tips and tricks for lakes like Clear Lake, the Delta, Lake Success, maybe Lake Salt Springs Valley Reservoir, stuff like that. Any of your local ponds, or if you're out of state, any of those shallow lakes that are, say, 60 feet deep or shallower. So we're going to get to those next. That'll be on a different video, but today we're going to cover highland reservoirs. All right, my second favorite winter lure, Ned rig. When the fish absolutely must have the lure on the bottom. And here's how you can tell when this happens. Say you're drop shotting, right? And a lot of guys know how to do that up and down, where like, say they're just literally dropping the drop shot straight down like I told you, and you have that whatever, a foot, 6, 8 inch, whatever you go with, leader, and you let your drop shot just slowly fall to the ground, and then you pop it back up, but your weight stays on the ground and you're just barely using your tip. So when you get bit, when your drop shot hits the ground, but you're not getting bit when it's up here, that's a good sign. Just put that drop shot away, or shorten the leader down to like 2 or 3 inches, kind of like a Tokyo rig, or go to the Ned rig. And they're all deadly. And the reason why is they're an open hook bait. There's no plastic that you have to penetrate through. There's no weed guard. There's nothing. It's just straight hook in the mouth. So those are great lures for the wintertime, especially when the bite's tough. Now, how about in the wintertime when the bite isn't tough? Well, you could definitely throw those. Well, who wants to throw those? So we're going to get into my #1 favorite active wintertime bait, right? That's going to be, at this point in time, the LV 500. It has taken over #2 for me, which was the jig. Now, I think there's times when this jig is going to outdo the LV, and I'll talk about why, when, and where. So this LV is great in places that kind of are sandy, small rock, and not very snaggy, right? To where what I'll do is I'll bomb this LV 500 out. I'll let it, so we'll do a little illustration. So I'll bomb the LV out, right? Say I'll get close to shore on this one. Say I bomb the LV out, and I'll just soft hop it. Just those little, you want to feel that rattle, just a little second of like a purring, right? That's kind of the only way I can explain it. Just small little hops, and let it sit there. So you're working it like a jig, but don't drag it, but it's almost dragging you. Just let it sit. Just that little vibration, let it sit. Little vibration, let it sit. Little vibration. That, or big pops, and then let it sit. Big pops, and let it sit. Exactly like a jig, but with rattles, right? And treble hooks. So yes, you're gonna snag more if there's any logs or stuff down there, but if you got the money to waste on them, you're gonna get some big fish, and you're gonna be having a better hookup ratio, because those treble hooks are just gonna grab right into them. Versus a jig, you might actually have a 10-pounder or 5-pounder, whatever. You might have a nice fish actually grab that, but these fish are smart. And in the wintertime, sometimes these fish are very finicky, and they may spit that thing out really quick. And if you don't, sometimes that jig bite feels like a weight at first. And then once you realize it's not a rock, or it feels soft, or it kind of moves on you a little, sometimes it's already too late, because then when you go to swing, done, right? The fish felt you and spit it out. So it's the winter time can be a tough game. So when the bite is decent, I like the LV 500. Now if I'm fishing around any wood or big rock and snaggly rock, but not too snaggly, I'm going to the jig. If the bite is active, then that's going to take my place. It just depends on location, so you got to remember that. Now So I guess tying for second slash third would be the jerk bait. And this has its own category, has its own, separate thing, just like every one of these does. But the jerk bait, I'm going to break it down into two very simple categories. Suspended jerk bait or a floating jerk bait. That's the two main ones. And then you've got shallow or deep, right? So a suspended jerk bait I'm going to use in warmer weather, way more active weather, like the fall when they're chasing bait fish. And I'm just basically moving that thing along, taking brief pauses, let it kind of float back up, and then moving it along. May not be jamming, but I'm using it in more active. Now, the suspended, I'm using in more cold times, and I'm moving it more slower. Now, there's a shallow suspended and a deep suspended. So let's say they're in the winter time, sometimes these bass will pull up shallow, right? And they'll hit stuff like a jerk bait. And so I like to use a a shallow diving suspended jerk bait if I'm fishing in nasty rocks, if I'm fishing shallow, if I think them fish have moved shallow, if I'm fishing in a pond, if I'm fishing over stuff and I don't want my stuff going too deep into it, or if I know the fish is in that water column, right? If the fish are pulled back, in lakes like McClure, Don Pedro, New Melones, the water is extremely clear. So those fish will come up too sometimes, just longer pauses, right? That's when I'll go to the deep diving, suspended in the cold weather. And I'll use that. So the jerk bait is one awesome tool to use. I recommend Megabass, and you can start out with the KVD Strike Kings and the Lucky Craft. Those are pretty good ones to just get out there and start with. Then you can graduate to like Megabass, and there's all kinds of other higher end ones as well. But those are good ones to start with. Last but not least, also one of my favorites. Let's put it over here. Number 4 coming in, the A-Rig, the man himself. This rig right here will catch you monsters, catch you 2 fish at one time. I'm no A-Rig professional, but I've definitely caught some fish on it. And I love this rig in the wintertime and in the late fall, early fall. Heck, even this thing will perform a lot more often than you realize, believe it or not. I've used this thing many different times of the year. Whenever the bait fish is schooled up and the fish are active, whenever you can catch them on a swim bait or a spinner bait, you can usually throw this thing on. Just adjust your swim baits to match the hatch, whether you're throwing big swim baits, the 4, 5s, 6s on it, whether you're throwing 2s, 3s, whatever floats your boat. It's a very versatile bait. So the A-Rig would definitely be one of my favorite winter baits. All right, guys and gals, so far we've covered how I fish and what angles, what speed, my favorite lures. We've covered a lot of different things. I think one other thing we need to go over is where are you going to find them? We talked about this earlier a little bit, but in the wintertime, there's just 2 main places you should really check on, and then the transitions to those places depending on the weather and how deep into the winter are you. So, and those are going to be two places. So main lake points, obviously, right? Any main lake point, hit those up. And then on the inverse side would be the backs of any creeks. You want to get as far back as you can until it's shallow, and then graph and check, fish blind until, and keep your trolling motor on a very low speed in the winter unless it's very windy. And that's a different story. You don't want to cause a lot of noise. Keep the noise in your boat to a minimum. And another, I guess, tip or trick, I give this one credit to Ryan Cook, but, me and the other guys have talked about this as well, is the potential noise, the pinging that your graph makes. So if you're in shallow water or in a cove like this, the cove is going to ping your graph, is going to bounce off of that and make even more noise. It's going to amplify it. The fish are going to hear your graph, believe it or not, they will. So I don't know if that's going to make them not bite or not, but in the wintertime, if you're struggling and you know there's some fish there, shut your graph off. Blind fish using the techniques that we talked about. Find, are they shallow? Are they deep? Are they suspended? Are they on the bottom? These are the main factors that I'm worried about when I first get on a lake, whether I've been fishing it a lot or whether I'm new to it. Here's some of the, I guess this is probably going to be some of the most important information that I could give to you that I know. I'm no pro. Again, I don't claim to know it all. Everything I said, you know, I'm sure there's someone else that fishes differently. But this is the joy about sharing how we fish and watching others fish, is seeing that other people can catch fish their way at different times, and it's really cool. And if you're open and receptive, you're going to learn a lot more instead of being kind of closed-minded or like, hey, this is how it has to be. Now there's some definite fundamental rules in fishing that, you know, yeah, you know, you don't want to, and sometimes I definitely break a lot of those, like how you hold your rod. You know, don't hold your rod too high, point it at the lure. You know, there's some things I slack on, definitely. But, you know, I'm not perfect, nobody is, but I try my best to be aware of those things. So here's some of the most important information that I can impart to you, and this probably goes for any time of the year, but especially during the winter. Here's the main factors I'm worried with. Here are the hows, okay? I call them the hows. How deep / shallow. How fast or slow. And this is in the order of importance too, honestly, in my opinion. This is it. This is it. The bread and butter, ladies and gentlemen. Being straight honest with you. First and foremost, before this, is where. Once you can even get an even close guesstimate as to where you think the fish are going to be, that's first. Then you get into this. And this is, in my opinion, the bread and butter. I worry about how deep, how shallow are the fish? Where are they at? Where are they positioned? Are they deep? Are they shallow? Where am I finding them? So I'm going to search all over if I have to until I start getting bites at least, right? And then, depending on the time of year and what position, and even then, how fast or slow do I need to work my bait? And that you need to be mindful of your boat speed and your trolling motor as well. How fast or slow? And that could literally mean in the winter time, do I drag it? Could be fast. Do I dead stick it? Could be slow. So you gotta think about that. I'm serious, like casting it out like bait and hanging out for a minute and chatting with your buddies and dragging your bait 1 foot. And then chatting with your buddies for another 30 seconds and then dragging it another foot. And that's particularly what you want to do if the bite's super brutal and you know there's fish there. You see them on the fish finder, 100% sure they're bass. You've been catching them or whatever, but weather, pressure, something has locked them down and they won't bite. Sometimes a dead stick is just brutal. It'll go to work on them. And then once you get them to start biting, the other ones will actually usually fire up actually, and you can get some active bites for a little bit. Then they'll kind of settle back down. Go right back to it. So anyways, number 1, how deep or how shallow are the fish? Very important. Number 2, how fast or how slow am I using my lure? Number 3, how big or how small is my bait? That's also very important if you're out to catch numbers, if you're out to get those first 5. And that is also important if you're trying to catch the monster, right? They say. So, and I've caught monsters on both. Go figure. I've got an 8.5 pounder on a drop shot. I've got multiple 10s. I've got them on crankbaits. I've got them on jigs. I do not have a double digit on a swim bait, being real, but I've got some monster fish. My buddy's got a 12 on a spinnerbait, a 13 on a crankbait. So a lot of big fish have came off the bigger lures. But this guy, he came in the wintertime, 35 feet deep, all by himself. I graphed him and I seen him all by himself in the back of a cut, a channel, not a creek necessarily, but a channel coming down the mountain, sitting in 35 feet. I marked a big old signature. I quietly backed off with my trolling motor on low. I cast it past the fish and I dragged it in. I got this tiny little 8.5 pound bass. It was so awesome. The best fight of my life right there. So, off of a drop shot. I hope these tips and tricks help. Again, please remember, I'm no pro. I don't know it all. I just want to help share what I do know, and hopefully it helps. So we'll see you out on the lake on the next one. Today's video is just the tips and tricks, and I hope it helps.